Hello everyone, this is part 11 of What If Naruto Passed the Genin test, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. The torrent of rain that came crashing down in constant waves, accompanied by the freezing gusts from all around, pummeled Team 7 as they marched along the beach. Behind them they left a small raft made from fragments of other boats that they had used to cross the channel and gain the island coast. It rolled around on the tossing water's edge for a few moments before the waves claimed it and dragged back into the water, where it quickly disappeared into the mist. "That raft of yours didn't last too long," said Tazuna to Kakashi. "It wasn't meant to," replied the Genin over the rain. "It got us here in one piece, so I'd say it did its job." The old man nodded, and then pointed off down the beach towards a small collection of lights barely visible in the rain. "That's the village of Hajike," he said. "It's the primary construction site and where we'll be spending most of our time during the building process." "How soon will it be done?" "The bridge, I mean?" asked Naruto as they quickened their pace. "They've been working on it for the past 9 months, though they've stopped now to wait for me," replied Tazuna. "Over 90% of it's done, but we're moving into the most dangerous phase, building with almost no foundation other than sandstone under the piles. The schedule calls for it to be done in the next 2 months, but once the men hear about Goto's most recent attack, I think they'll agree that it needs to be up within 2 weeks. So I'm guessing we're going straight to the job site?" asked Sasuke. "Of course," said Tazuna, "but you don't need to worry about food or lodging. Hajike is literally right at the edge of the bridge. They're a poor village like most of the rest in the wave, but they've been happy to volunteer not only their services, but their homes and resources. This bridge is more than a construction project. Because it means freeing us of Goto, it's a unifying cause. SC. Despite the weather and the encroaching night, construction began on the bridge within an hour of Tazuna arriving on site. He immediately took the role of chief supervisor and began shouting orders through sheets of rain that battered down, and constantly moved from one end of the bridge to the other to inspect a dozen different facets of the process at once and acquaint himself with the many people under his command. Naruto was amazed at the transformation that suddenly gripped the old man. Tazuna changed from a somewhat laid-back old geezer with an acute problem into a fiery zealot. 20 years of fatigue dropped from his shoulders, and a new light flashed behind his eyes as he spurred the workers on wherever he went with pep talks, and stern but encouraging speeches. The dozens of professional workmen and the numerous volunteers seemed to look to him as they would a general. At first, all 4 ninja tried to keep up with Tazuna and act as his bodyguards all at once, but due to his constant movement, Kakashi decided it would be best if they spread out. Sasuke was to patrol around the outer 3 edges of the bridge and watch for any kind of threat from the sea, while Naruto and Ino would guard the ramp leading from the shore to the viaduct's main platform. The copy nin himself would watch over Tazuna, and at his order they all set about their jobs. As the minutes rolled on into hours and the midnight approached, Naruto was fascinated with the obvious amounts of effort that were going into this bridge on so many fronts. As he looked on into the village, which began not 10 feet after the bridge ended, men and women walked up the ramp and onto the platform in an almost constant trickle. They would stop by a small booth occupied by a large man with a list in his hand and a crate behind him. After a brief talk, the man would turn to the crate and pull out a hard hat, hand it to the volunteer and then look down at the list and assign him something to do. He didn't, however, say anything about payment. Most of the volunteers were sent back into the city to obtain food and supplies, but some were handed a tool or a sword and sent to work or guard the platform. It was obvious that, despite the vast amounts of available labor, the real work was being saved for the professional workers, while the volunteers were more often than not given some light task or assigned simply to stand watch. "Isn't it amazing?" whispered Ino to Naruto as the two of them stood close together, "how ready and willing these people are to work into the darkest hours to get a job done for their country." "Yeah," Naruto answered, "some places would force work like this for minimal wages, but these people are eager to do it for nothing at all. This Goto, I've never met him and I already hate everything about him." "He's a monster," whispered Ino. "How could he do that to those people?" "I don't understand." Naruto looked off into the distance and sighed as the rain began to come down even harder and faster. A frigid gust blew up over the edge of the bridge, making the already cold rain absolutely chilling. Evil is unfathomable. This is absolutely miserable, groaned Sasuke as he marched around the platform's perimeter. He shivered and wrapped his arms tightly around himself in an effort to keep out the cold. I've been walking mindlessly around for 3 hours, the rain hasn't stopped once for even a minute, and it's getting colder by the second. It was 3 am, and Sasuke was right. The temperature had been steadily dropping, but not enough to freeze the rain into hail, but rather the near-frozen droplets merely splattered on contact with the genin and soaked right through his clothes. Sasuke began to shiver incessantly as he made his rounds, but despite his condition and increasingly pessimistic outlook, he refused to abandon his duties to go and look for some kind of overclothing. Why didn't I bring something warmer? These shorts barely hold out Konoha's temperate weather, and this just doesn't, ACHOO. His bemmings were interrupted by a loud sneeze and a raspy cough. Forget it. The genin looked over towards the ramp, and immediately caught sight of Ino and Naruto, standing on the side of one lane and huddled close together. Both were shivering but neither was neglecting to watch for danger. He looked over to find Kakashi watching Tazuna like a hawk as the old man loudly discussed design plans with another contractor. Awfully bad weather for this time of year, shouted Tazuna over the howling wind after they'd apparently finished the discussion. Yeah, but not unheard of for this part of the country, shouted back the unnamed contractor. Just last Monday we got snow. And remember that blizzard that hit last year in the S of autumn? Tazuna laughed, despite the elements, and nodded. Do I ever? He responded, near about froze my ass off. We all about froze our asses off, shouted his friend. The two men laughed and separated, going opposite ends of the bridge. Up until then, Sasuke had been focusing all of his attention on the surrounding seas, watching for danger, and only then turned his focus on the bridge enough to notice that everyone he could see, probably some 200 busy workers and a few dozen sentinels, were all in the same boat as he was. None of them were comfortable, everyone was freezing and shivering. They all had blue lips and numb feet, but continued working without question. Granted, they were all wearing considerably more than Sasuke, but still. These are determined people, thought Uchiha boy. Excuse me, said a feminine voice behind the genin. Sasuke turned and saw a young, raven-haired girl standing next to him and holding a large basket made of stretched hide. She could have been no older than 12 at the most, and she carried herself with an air of shy humility that shone in her ebony eyes. Her black cloak hung around her like it was made of lead, completely immune to the gusts that were throwing others' clothes all about. Can I help you? Sasuke asked through his chattering teeth, trying to be somewhat polite. She shook her head a little, and looked down. I noticed you looked cold, and she stammered and set the basket down and opened it up. The girl reached in and pulled out a heavy black cloak and raised it up to him. It's water fox hide, she said, completely waterproof and very warm. Plus the fur feels nice to the touch. She smiled and told Sasuke to please take it. Thank you, said the genin hesitantly, but not refusing the warm cloak. He slung it on and put up the hood, noticing a difference immediately. The hide did indeed shield him from any additional soaking, and the fur lining seemed already warm. This is wonderful, he said with a smirk, even if the pelt felt like it weighed 20 pounds. She smiled. I'm glad you like it. Now we match. She laughed, seeming a bit more confident now that he had accepted her gift. And I'm Fanvi by the way. Who are you? Sasuke's lip twitched up in a smile and he pulled his arms into the cloak to keep them warm. Uchiha Sasuke, he said. Fanvi gawked and looked him over quickly, then shook herself and focused on his face again. You're an Uchiha? She asked in wonder, the legendary clan from Konoha. Is that where you're from, Konoha? Sasuke just nodded, not sure what to make of the girl. My daddy is a scholar, said Fanvi. He researches bloodline limits and all kinds of clans for the government, and his favorite thing to talk about were the Uchiha and their Sharingan. He said it worked like it was magic or something. And if anyone says anything about Madara he talks for hours and hours, but I just tune him out most of the time. Though not when he talks about how the Uchiha were considered one of the most handsome clans. Sasuke smiled, enjoying the praise, but at the same time a part of him twinged at the mention of darker times. Anyway, I guess you have stuff to do here, being an Uchiha ninja and all, said the girl, but would you mind if I just sorta tagged along? Sasuke smiled again. Shouldn't you be getting home to your mom? I'm sure she's worried about you being out so late. My mom's not around, said Fanvi matter-of-factly. I never knew her because daddy says she had to go away so I could be born. And daddy is almost never around, so I almost always stay up all night and just sleep during the day anywhere I can find a place. You mean you don't have a home? Nope, said Fanvi, just a house the landlady kicks me out of. Sasuke gulped, not sure how to respond, but just nodded. There hasn't been any trouble, he reasoned, why not? Besides, I at least owe it to her for the cloak. The raven-haired boy nodded and Fanvi's eyes lit up. Immediately the two of them began making a pleasant conversation, as Sasuke made his rounds with a renewed vigor. Roughly 2 miles away from the bridge, 2 men stood on the deck of a large vessel. An awning made of an exceptionally thick and durable cloth, embroidered with golden thread, protected them from the driving rain as the shorter of the two looked through a large set of binoculars at the workmen skittering about like ants on the bridge. One of the two was tall and robed in a black tunic that hid his figure from his chin down to his toes. Red clouds blazed on the cloth like fire, and a straw hat hid his face. The other gentleman was short and chubby, with small black sunglasses and spiky brown hair. That Zabuza of yours failed to K the squad, said the man in the hat drolly. If I were any less patient that would be a deal breaker right there, you know, which of course would be grounds for me to immediately execute you. But seeing as how I am kind, I will give you until midnight to complete the job. Despite the almost light-hearted tone of the words, the man's voice carried a deathly cold edge. The smaller man gulped. I am terribly sorry, Tobi-sama. You have my assurances that he won't fail again. You yourself said that Zabuza won't be back to full strength until this evening, which cuts your line quite close. What do you plan to do, Goto-san? Goto gulped again, not sure how to answer. I could send in the mercenaries. Cannon fodder, chuckled Toby. They might kill a few of the workers, but even that young Kunoichi is more than a match for any of them. A ninja of any caliber after all stands far above any normal man. Haku could lead them, muttered Goto. That young person has massive potential, but without Zabuza Haku would quickly be overwhelmed by Kakashi and Ked. Though by all means, send in the cannon fodder. It's not like they're doing anything but taking up space on these ships. Fewer mouths to feed and fewer men to pay. Besides, they would likely kill a few of the workers, as I said, which would be good for your ends if nothing else. SC. It is so bloody cold out here. Naruto mentally whined. His extra layers of clothes provided him some amount of protection, especially since the jacket was a thick fleece, though even with the luxuries he was miserable. I thought this place was supposed to be like a balmy 70 degrees year-round or something. How you holding up, Ino? Asked the boy in orange to the girl hanging onto his arm, his voice quaking from the cold. The bleached blonde girl only whimpered and clutched his arm a bit more tightly in response. Her hair was soaked and clinging to her face, and the somewhat skimpy outfit she wore afforded her no warmth at all. The rain was a never-ending curtain that beat down on her, no matter how hard Naruto tried to act as a shield. Maybe you should go to town and find someplace warm to dry off and rest, Naruto yelled over a howling gust. Ino shook her head. I'm fine, she muttered through chattering teeth. Naruto shook his head and looked down. Ino, I'm wearing 10 times more than you and I'm freezing. Go and find some place to stay warm. I'm not going to leave, she said stubbornly. Kakashi-sensei told me to help you guard the ramp, and that's exactly what I plan to do. That's admirable, but you're going to have a hard time keeping watch if you're of pneumonia. I'll tell Kakashi-sensei about it, don't worry, and just go get some sleep in a warm bed. Ino was silent for a minute, then let go of Naruto and took a step back. Be careful, she said quietly, almost drowned out by the wind, don't do anything stupid. Naruto smiled and put an arm around her shoulder. No promises. She grinned playfully, then wrapped her arms around herself and jogged off into down the ramp and stopped at the nearest house's door. Naruto watched as she knocked and was accepted in by a gentle-looking old woman with the stem of a smoking pipe in her mouth. Well, sighed the blonde Genin, back to business. He crossed his arms and kept watch for several more minutes. People had stopped coming up to work a little while ago, and the man at the booth had taken up a hammer himself and was currently working on reinforcing some small support holding up a light post. Off in the distance, a bell began to chime that it was 4 in the morning. And then Daddy told me that the cow had made him do it. Fanvi laughed at her own joke as she trotted behind Sasuke. The boy cracked a smile at the mildly amusing story, but never once deviated from his route. While he had devoted some of attention to Fanvi, he hadn't failed to notice a dense fog lingered over the water at the base of the bridge, whereas only seconds before it was several dozen yards away. Clank! There was a metallic noise from no more than 10 feet to Sasuke's left, and he turned to see a small dark shape protruding over the edge of the bridge's guardrail. It was no larger than a child's ball, but had 3 wickedly sharp hooks that clung to the side of the platform. What in the world? Wondered Sasuke as he walked over to investigate, motioning for Fanvi to stay put. He reached the object, but it was far from a light post and shadowed by a stack of crates, so it appeared even to a ninja's eyes as little more than a strange shadow in the dark. He reached out and tapped on it with a kunai, and heard a metallic thump. What the hell? He gasped, as dozens more of things attached to the edge of the bridge with clanging reports. Suddenly the air filled with the sound of more than rain and wind, as Sasuke looked up and saw scores of thin, elongated shapes hurtling down towards him. We're under attack, he shouted as he spun around and dove over to Fanvi. The confused girl looked up at the sky just before Sasuke pulled her down and covered her. Arrows came clattering down all around them, whizzing by their ears, thudding into boxes and crates and pinning the tails of their cloaks to the ground. Sasuke and the girl were lucky enough to avoid the shafts, but many others were not, and shouts echoed around as the scene played out all over the bridge. As soon as the volley ended, Sasuke jumped up ready to fight, just in time to see dark shapes leaping onto the bridge from the points where the sinister shapes had stuck. Grappling hooks, yelled the genin as he sped forward. Fanvi, run. The young girl turned on her heel and sprinted off, panting in fear while Sasuke leapt into the air and performed a lightning-fast set of seals. Fire erupted from his mouth and fell like hail on the invaders, charring them and burning a few of the ropes which they'd climbed. The sounds of battle erupted from all over the bridge as the sentinels drew their swords and charged the attackers. Sasuke turned to see Naruto had already twirled his own 2 wakizashi from their sheaths and set to work dispatching any foe who came his way. Meanwhile the raven-haired genin flung a shuriken at a head that peeked over the edge. The sly projectile thudded into the attacker's skull and the limp body fell backwards. Acting on instinct, Sasuke spun and ducked under a sword that missed the top of his head by millimeters. The genin quickly saw his assailant had been thrown off balance by the evasion, and jumped up, kicking him in the chin and snapping his head back to the painful crack of breaking bone. That was either his en or his jaw, thought Sasuke, and judging by the way the man fell and stopped moving, he assumed it was his en. They're coming up over both sides, yelled someone from a ways off. Indeed, more hooks had planted themselves and men of every size were leaping up to fight. Oh no you don't, shouted Naruto as he saw a group of the attackers about to overwhelm some young girl running away. Kyuubi, chakra now. Pleasure, spill blood with it, growled the fox from deep within Naruto's mind, as a faint red haze swirled around Naruto's hands when he crossed his index fingers. Kage Bunshin no Justu. Instantly, dozens of clones of Naruto sprang into existence, each with swords drawn and faces snarling with a battle cry. The clones scattered out and began to fight on numerous fronts, spinning through the enemy like tissue paper. Inokming! Shouted Sasuke from far away, and Naruto looked up to see hundreds more arrows falling out of the sky, numerous times more than before. Cries from both sides rang out as the shafts continued to fall and tear into anything and anyone in their path. Dozens of boss collapsed to the ground, men who'd been fighting with their backs to a large box were pinned through to the crate by the long arrows. The genin's shadow clones were almost completely wiped out by the barrage, but that didn't deter him from his fight. He ducked and weaved and dodged and blocked, skirting the shots to slash through any of the men climbing up onto the bridge. Naruto, Sasuke, take out those ships, shouted Kakashi. Naruto spun to see his master, or more accurately a duo of his master's copies frantically defending Tazuna from no less than 10 invaders who were lucky enough to avoid the rain of arrows. The blonde genin jumped up onto the guard rail and sure enough saw several flatbed barges floating below, each carrying between 30 and 40 men with longbows and crossbows. So many, he thought. Use that jutsu Sasuke did. I'll try. Naruto grimaced and put his hands together. What were the seals again? Serpent, rat, monkey, boar, horse, tiger. He pressed his fingers to his lips and blew out a massive ball of fire infused with a swirling red chakra. The fireball vaporized the rain in its way, creating a cloud of steam and incinerating the barge below. As the flame connected with the channel and extinguished, a cloud of vapor shot up from the wreckage with a loud hiss. Clones, Kit, clones. Leave the chakra to me. Naruto pressed his fingers together and summoned 20 more cage buncheons, each with red chakra swirling around their hands. In a flash, they all rattled off the 6 seals and took in a huge breath. To the men on the barges below, frightened and confused by the sudden and fiery disappearance of one of the comrades' ships, it abruptly seemed that an all-encompassing wall of white-hot flame was crashing down on them like an avalanche, just before their world went black. To the copy nin defending Tazuna, it appeared as though a scene from years ago was replaying itself. My God, muttered Kakashi as he watched the Naruto clones disappear and the boy fall backwards onto his haunches against the bridge, Kyuubi no Kitsune. His distraction was quickly forgotten, however, when Tazuna called out for help and the copy nin was forced back into action. What's the matter with me? Naruto asked Kyuubi as the boy's vision spun and his stomach convulsed. Why do I feel so sick all of a? He cut himself off to turn onto his hands and knees and throw up. It's my chakra, said Kyuubi. To you humans it's horribly poisonous and you aren't immune to the effects of using it. But it will pass, so get up and fight. Naruto nodded and tried to stand, but was so disoriented by the sudden rush of nausea that he couldn't move without falling over again. He looked over and saw a tall man rushing at him with a sword raised high, and the Genin smirked as he pulled out a shuriken. He tossed it at the man, who knocked it aside like a pesky bug. Oh damn, was all Naruto could think as the dizziness exploded into all-out vertigo and made it impossible for him to even keep his balance effectively. The sword swooped down and Naruto flinched. There was a clank as the sword sailed off as if it had been struck and flew out of the assailant's hand. It noisily banged against the ground and rolled away. The man, half stunned, looked over and saw a young girl with bleached blonde hair standing a few yards off after having just thrown the kunai that disarmed him. Ino, Naruto smiled. Get away from him, you pig, growled the girl as she pulled yet another kunai out from behind her dress. SC. No, you won't get anything out of, growled the warrior who had earlier attacked Naruto. Only now he was hogtied and squirming on the ground with his eyes screwed shut in consternation. Get out of my head. Kakashi and Naruto stood next to him, while Ino's limp body slumped behind them. This is taking longer than I thought, mumbled Kakashi to Naruto. Either this is a very strong mind, or it's Ino's first interrogation via spirit bind. Or both, said Naruto as the victim continued to squirm on the ground. How exactly does spirit bind work? Is it anything like that shadow thing that Shikamaru can do? Kakashi nodded. In a way. The Naras use shadows controlled by chakra to physically manipulate matter. The Yamanakas, however, actually leave their boss and overshadow another being's soul. Not the most wholesome ability to be sure, but it has its advantages, like being able to break into another person's memories, for example. Get out, screamed the man on the ground, temporarily distracting them. She is definitely persistent, said Kakashi, albeit a little sadistic. What exactly did you tell her to find out? Asked Naruto. Kakashi shrugged his shoulders and exhaled audibly. The usual, who he's working for, how many of them there are, who leads them and the like. But I doubt we'll get too far. Just then, the man stopped squirming and passed out. Ino's body jerked, then she stood up and popped her en, then shivered at the cold. He works under Goto but doesn't know anything, said Ino quietly. He's never even seen his boss face to face. But Goto is behind all this, shouted Tazuna angrily as he stormed through the rain to the group. He killed no less than 50 of my men. Tazuna jerked his hand towards the scene behind him where volunteers were scouring the bridge and sifting through the boss. The living, regardless of who they'd fought for only minutes before, were carried off to the village to be cared for, while the S were piled on carts. And how am I supposed to deal with this? You need to go and hunt Goto down. I doubt, Tazuna-san, that Goto would be easy to find. Kakashi looked off into space and squinted as the rain began to slow from a rushing torrent to a drizzle. Besides, killing him would likely not be the end of your troubles. What do you mean? Asked the old man angrily. He's been the root of all of our troubles. Up until now, said Kakashi, almost as much to himself as to Tazuna, however it seems that Goto is no longer the one pulling all of the strings. Even in Konoha we've knowledge of the black market and its dealers, and we've compiled information on every one of them for future reference, and I can say with confidence that Goto is acting out of character. How so? Asked Tazuna. For one, that slime is clever. He will never willingly enter a battle of any kind that he knows he can't win, and when he does choose to fight he devotes all of his attention and resources to the battle. Doesn't it seem strange that he sent no ninja to fight us even though he had the money and the connections to hire someone like Zabuza? Tazuna was silent. It's almost like he's rushed, said Ino, drawing all eyes to her. When I was in the mercenary's head, I sensed a definite sense of urgency. Maybe it wasn't being rushed, but he definitely felt the need to accomplish his mission as quickly as he could. So, muttered Tazuna, he greatly emphasized the conditional, if someone were pulling Goto's strings, who could it be? He has the money to hire an army of assassins and ninjas, and he fears no one taking away his wealth, except maybe us. Making money on top of what he has is no use to him. What could possibly buy off his services? What about his life? Asked Kakashi. What if he's having a sword hung over his head and being ordered around by someone? But again, said Tazuna slowly, by whom and for what? No one answered. Tazuna-san, said a young man, probably in his mid-teens, as he jogged up to the old man. Tazuna nodded and the boy held up a clipboard. We've cleared the bridge of the injured and S. What are the damages? Asked Tazuna, taking the clipboard. 88 of the workmen are S, sir, along with 103 volunteers, not counting the 30 sentinels. 9 men are missing and presumed S. There are a total of 210 injured in the village being cared for. Tazuna growled and looked down at the bridge. Ensure that all of the wounded receive proper medical care, or at least as proper as we can give given the circumstances. Even Goto's men? Asked the boy. Did I stutter? Barked the old man. I said all of them. We're not monsters here, and I refuse to stoop to a monster's level just to satisfy a desire for revenge. Understood. The boy nodded and jogged off quickly, as Tazuna put a hand on Kakashi's shoulder for support. I've never thought I couldn't do this, until now, Tazuna groaned, suddenly slumping like a hunchback. Half of my workforce is S, and, he reached and rubbed his eyes, they SD needlessly. Kakashi nodded with his eyes closed. All the more reason for us to carry on and dedicate this bridge as a monument for their S, and as a monument to freedom from tyranny. Goto is so strong though, Tazuna mumbled, I can't see how he's not winning this fight. You have to fight back, said Naruto. Tazuna and Ino both looked at the orange-clad Genin, one with hope in her eyes and the other with tears forming in his. If you don't then he will win. We can protect you, but it takes more than a ninja to save a country. It takes freedom, and hope. You're the only one who can give these people that. Tazuna was silent. Naruto looked around at how even now men were walking off of the bridge. Some had dropped the tools and swords, while others were carrying them in tired hands. The rain had finally stopped, but the weather was a poor consolation for all that. He saw Ino looking on at him with a glimmer in her eye, but a pained grimace spoiling her expression. Even Kakashi refused to make eye contact with either of his students. Wait, said Naruto, where's Sasuke? Kakashi looked down and closed his eye. For a brief second Naruto could have sworn a tiny tear appeared before it was immediately absorbed by the mask hiding Kakashi's face. He's attending to something elsewhere, said the copy nin in a low tone. SC. Out in the dark of the early morning woods, Sasuke stood beside a tall tree. His black cloak hung around him as his head drooped down towards the ground. His soaking raven hair was chaotically tossed over his forehead and in his face was the look of a corpse. His eyes seemed to be covered by the film of death. He stood several feet away from and looking over a small mound of dirt, not more than a foot high, and about 5 feet long. A sapling was growing at one end of the mound, and DRD over the fledgling tree was a black cloak, LD by many holes and slashed open down the back. The Uchiha clutched his hand so tightly he shook. Tears dropped from his eyes and blood slowly sped from wounds in his palms cut by his own nails. He closed his eyes and drew in a deep, yet quivering breath, before he let it out in a solitary, quiet sob. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.